and welcome to the Demand Gen Daily Podcast. All right, another episode of the podcast here, and today we are going to be talking about fractional CMOs, the rise of them. Like, this is something that a few years ago wasn't as popular. Like, I would say maybe 7 to 10 years ago, CFOs, like chief financial officers, were more of a thing. But now we've gone to the direction of CMOs, I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, especially.
Yeah.
But we're in a really high growth curve where people are using these services. And we've gotten some questions about from some clients. What's the value of this? Is it right for my business? What's happening in the market that merits this? Ricky, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the fractional CMO's unique position. And this is really, you have a lot of smaller companies that are looking for that higher level of expertise, but they just can't necessarily afford to fulfill the full team, or they're looking at potential like multiple partners to fulfill different parts of their marketing. And the fractional CMO basically brings all those pieces together for them.
Yeah, and one of the things that I tell people all the time, it depends on your situation if this kind of role is right for you, like the fractional kind. Obviously, if you can't do like a full-time role because it would be a couple $100,000 per year, that's one thing. But beyond that, it's how complex is your marketing? Are you in a high growth stage? Do you need somebody to help you put a team together internally? One of the big things about this role is that it can be very helpful to get the lay of the land. So what kind of team do you need to build internally? What's your overall strategy, right? And then basically starting to build out that team. So like job descriptions, doing the interviews, hiring, performance management of those like internal individuals that are full-time, even though they're part-time, because often they can do quite a bit of work in very little time. So because they have experience and they've done this before. That's one main aspect of it. The other aspect of it is auditing like your full system currently. CMOs generally know quite a bit about, beyond just marketing, they also know the connection to sales quite well. If there's maybe something being dropped between marketing and sales, they would be able to identify that because they're built like consultants at the end of the day. As well as, for example, in other areas, you've hit a plateau. If you've hit a plateau, like this could be a great answer to break out of that.
Yeah. And I would say they're much more financially driven, where you might see some companies hiring, like building a marketing team, starting with a marketing manager. Marketing managers generally are much more focused on the tactics. They're much more KPI driven, whereas the CMO level of individual generally has a much better understanding of how that ties back into the finances of the business and what are those metrics that need to be achieved to drive the business forward. It is definitely a higher level skill set that requires a bit more financial acumen.
Yeah, the other thing I would also say is that sometimes people want somebody to sit at the leadership level and contribute at that leadership executive level where you can have a business conversation at that level and be able to really get into strategic planning like next quarter, 6 months, years down the road, whereas somebody else that might be a bit more junior might not be able to have those conversations in a very effective way. So I think beyond what they do, I think that the rise of this is a few different things. For one, more people are increasingly more comfortable with being fractional, right? The math is actually really easy for the fractional CMO themselves. If you can get 5 or 10 companies to hire you, you make more money than if you were a full-time CMO at one company. Like, first and foremost, there's a financial incentive there. Number two, the realization that because the economy has been so good for so many years, the risk of actually being a fractional CMO has gone down quite a bit. Now, we might see this change as the economy gets a little bumpy here going into 2023. And however, it's been really good so far for most people, right? And the other thing is too, is that there's a lot of marketing jobs that based on the company that you're at, they might not have a CMO. So if you were a VP or a director of marketing, and you had nowhere to go, but you were ready for that next step, and maybe you were interviewing a couple places and they're like, actually, you're really good, but like you're a number 2 pick, and they've heard that a few times. They then understand that they are, in fact, a CMO but they can't. They can maybe get the job eventually, but it would just take interviewing for another year or so. They're like, why don't I just become a fractional CMO? I also think that from an industry perspective, many people are trying to scale faster. They're being more aggressive with their marketing, like especially in e-com, coaching businesses, things like this. They're being way more aggressive, and they're finding very quickly that the tactics are not enough to get them to where they want to be.
Yeah.
And it's given rise for the need of this as well.
I think that there's definitely a point there in terms of the complexities of the market. Subscriptions, e-com, coaching, funnels, anything that has like a complicated funnel approach. Again, like when we look back a few years at a lot of these funnels were primarily running through Facebook and it was just printing money. We're looking at a very different scenario these days where you need to, yes, you could still make great money there, but you need to have the full system, the email, the upsell, the downsell, all the different parts of this working
The
together in
brand.
sync. The brand, exactly. Yeah, and that's where the fractional CMO is able to bring all those pieces together in a cohesive package. And some of these coaches or business owners are finding they just don't have the depth where they can contribute at that level, and they need that higher level of expertise.
Yeah, and like things are usually going well for the companies that are hiring these fractional CMOs already. So it's not one of these like turnaround situations. It's usually like a plateau breaking situation. You're maybe making gains, maybe it's flat, but it's still positive, or the growth is there, but it's very slow. And there needs to be something that is missing brought in. And bringing in a fractional CMO is a great way to identify what that thing is and then slowly implemented. But because the team's already running on its own, you don't need that person full time. They just need to come in and inject the key insights, and then the team, because they're already very capable themselves of doing these things, can take those ideas and run with them with very little guidance. And the level of guidance is really the thing that if you're considering this kind of service, it's the level of guidance and the level of support you need, because if you're getting into the 15 or 20 hour a week mark of needing this person, it might make more sense to just hire them full time, right? Because the hourly rate is going to be much higher than if the person's employed. So it really goes back to need. Or maybe you can look at a VP of marketing or a marketing director hire instead. So those are the kind of the things that I would personally recommend at that point. Anyways, great show. Please remember to like, subscribe, ask us questions. We answer questions. Until next time.